Okay, let's dive in. It's getting harder and harder, isn't it, to shake that feeling the world is just accelerating, getting more complex in ways we can't quite grasp.
Oh, absolutely. That sense of complexity, it's everywhere. You read things, maybe like that review mentioning Fukuyama, and you think, wait, where are we actually heading?
Exactly. And that feeling, that disorientation maybe, it really sets the stage for what we're looking at today. You all know Harari's latest book, Nexus.
Nexus, a brief history of information networks from the Stone Age to AI. Quite the title.
Right, and it really does cover that huge sweep. I mean, connecting ancient clay tablets from Mesopotamia all the way to modern AI. That's ambitious.
It really is. And that's kind of the point, isn't it? Harari's using this long historical lens, looking at how information networks have always shaped us, to give us a framework for today.
So that's our goal here, really, to unpack Nexus, pull out those key insights, try to understand our current moment, especially with AI looming so large.
Consider it a shortcut for you, the listener. We'll try and break down these big, complex ideas.
Yeah, make it digestible. And Harari, well, he's known for being a compelling storyteller, a celebrated historian.
He definitely knows how to craft a narrative, but he also raises some, well, pretty serious flags in this book, doesn't he?
He does. Concerns about AI, about this sort of AI-driven universalism, and what it could mean for, politics, society, even art. It's heavy stuff.
It is. And look, before we get fully into the weeds on Nexus, if these topics, AI, its impact, are things you want to explore even further, we should mention.
Oh, right. Good point. For anyone listening who wants a deeper dive into AI itself, there's a comprehensive course over at rajamanikam.com.
And you can actually get a discount. Use the code QPT, that's Q-PT.
QPT at rajamanikam.com. Okay, definitely worth checking out. So, where should we start with Harari's argument? The beginning, I guess. Human networks.
Makes sense. Let's start there. The very foundation. Harari's big point right at the start is that human networks aren't just built on, transmitting facts about reality.
No, it's the stories. He argues the stories themselves are what create the networks. They're the glue. That feels important.
It's fundamental. And this idea about information itself, it's not just pure objective truth, right? But it's also not just a weapon or pure manipulation.
Somewhere in between.
Exactly. It's this nuanced space, which maybe offers a slightly more hopeful way to think about navigating all. It's not all just power plays.
In truth itself, it's complicated. Any story, any narrative, it has to focus on some things and ignore others, doesn't it?
Right. You've got objective facts, the sun rises in the east, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, that sort of thing. But then you have these subjective realities.
Shared beliefs, feelings.
And Harari says both types matter. In fact, as human power grows, these intersubjective realities, things that exist only because we collectively believe in them, become incredibly powerful.
Like state borders. The book summary uses that example. They aren't physically real like a mountain range, but try crossing one without permission.
Exactly. It's a shared fiction that has massive real-world consequences. Money is another classic example.
So humans develop these two kind of contradictory skills. The skill to figure out what's true.
And the skill to use both truths and fictions to build social order. And often Harari argues it's the fictions, the shared stories, that are actually better at maintaining that order.
Which is fascinating when you think about how we categorize the world. The book mentions debates in biology about species, or in psychiatry about mental health.
Yeah, or even just how universities divide up subjects, these neat boxes we create. Reality doesn't always fit into them, does it? The lines get blurry.
And then there's the power of document. Written records. They don't just describe reality. Sometimes they create it.
That Assyrian loan tablet example is amazing. The physical tablet was the debt. Its existence proved the loan happened almost regardless of anything else.
Wow. So that piece of clay embodied the agreement, the social reality.
Precisely. It shows how information, once formalized, can shape the tangible world. A principle we still rely on constantly, with contracts, property deeds.
Okay, so that sets the stage for how information works in human society. Now, what about power structures? How does information flow differently within them? The book talks about art struggling with bureaucracy.
Right, because bureaucracy isn't about heroes and villains, usually. It's about systems, processes, data flows. It doesn't make for a simple story.
Makes sense. And then the comparison between dictatorships and democracies.
Yeah, that's a key contrast Harari draws. In dictatorships, information tends to flow upwards, centrally. There's this assumption, often, of infallibility at the top.
But historically, there was just too much information for any one person or group to truly control everything. Right?
Exactly. There were practical. Democracies, on the other hand, are set up with decentralized information flow, multiple sources, checks and balance.
Because the assumption is that people are fallible. So you need mechanisms to catch errors to allow debate.
The challenge there, of course, is making sense of all that distributed information without getting bogged down.
And then, totalitarianism. That's presented as something distinct, aiming for total control.
Yeah, enabled by 20th century tech radio, phones, mass media, it created this, fantasy of centralized omniscience, like Stalin's system.
With the state, the party, the secret police all watching each other.
Right. All feeding information upwards, reinforcing the leader's control, a terrifying application of information networks.
Which leads to that really chilling idea. A future totalitarian regime run not by a person, but by AI.
That's the potential future Harari sketches out, a non-human intelligence strings.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. We've talked human networks. Now the big shift, computers entering the picture.
This is where things get really different. Harari argues that when computers stopped being just tools, like a hammer or even a printing press, and started becoming active agents.
Making decisions.
Yeah.
Generating ideas on their own.
Exactly. That's a fundamental change. They're not just processing information we give them, they're starting to operate independently within the network.
Which implies a potential shift in power, doesn't it? From humans to algorithms.
That's the core concern. As these systems become more autonomous, who's really in charge? And this brings us squarely to the alignment problem.
Ah, yes, alignment. Making sure the AI's goals line up with ours, with human values. Sounds simple, but
It's incredibly difficult. How do you translate fuzzy human concepts like fairness or well-being into cold hard code?
the book gives that YouTube example, right?
Yeah.
An AI told to maximize clicks.
We might do exactly that, but by pushing extreme, polarizing, or just plain weird content, because that's what grabs attention. It achieves the narrow goal, but the side effects could be disastrous.
And the AI might not understand the context, the bigger picture, the why behind our values.
Precisely. It could follow instructions literally, leading to really unintended, maybe harmful consequences, even with the best intentions from the programmers.
This feels connected to what Harari calls intercomputer reality. What exactly does he mean by it?
Think of it like the intersubjective realities we talked about earlier: money, nations, gods, things humans created through shared belief.
Okay.
Intercomputer realities are similar, but they're shared virtual environments created and maintained by net computers. Think online games, social media platforms, financial markets run by algorithms.
And these virtual spaces can influence the real physical world.
Absolutely. Just like our belief in money shapes the economy, what happens in these digital networks created and increasingly managed by AI has real-world consequences.
Which also makes the surveillance aspect even more potent.
Yeah, definitely. Historical dictators, even Stalin, couldn't literally watch everyone all the time. The tech just wasn't there.
But now, with digital footprints, smart devices, the potential for constant monitoring is, unprecedented.
It is. So navigating this always-on network control, the book suggests some practical things, right?
Yeah, like being aware of your digital footprint, consciously valuing offline time and space.
Critically thinking about the trade-offs we make, convenience versus privacy, staying informed.
And supporting transparency and good governance around these technologies. It feels like basic digital hygiene, almost, but maybe more urgent now.
Absolutely. Now, another key point. AI isn't perfect. It's fallible.
Not necessarily evil, like in the movies, but prone to errors.
Exactly. Harari draws a parallel with, say, the Soviet system again. It wasn't necessarily driven by pure malice, but its rigid information system led to massive distortions of reality and terrible outcomes.
So AI failures might come from mismatched goals, flawed data, things like that, not Skynet becoming self-aware and deciding to hate us.
More likely, yes. The fallibility often stems from that goal misalignment we discussed, or from biases baked into the system.
Bias. That's a huge topic with AI. And it's not just about AI learning human prejudices, is it?
No, it's more complex. The book summary breaks it down nicely. You have data bias. The training data itself reflects historical inequalities.
Like facial recognition struggling with darker skin tones because the training data was mostly white faces.
Exactly. Then there's algorithmic biases introduced by the design of the algorithm itself, the choices made by the developers.
Okay.
And finally, deployment bias, how the AI is actually used in the real world, which can amplify existing societal biases, even if the AI itself seems neutral on paper.
So multiple layers where bias can creep in. What can be done?
The suggestions include things like rigorous auditing of algorithms, bringing together experts from different fields, tech, ethics, social sciences.
Not just coders building it in isolation.
Right, and pushing for more transparency so we can understand how these systems are making decisions that affect us.
This ties into that phrase, the dictatorship of the like. Sounds catchy, but what's the idea?
It goes back to that YouTube example. The algorithm, seeking likes or engagement, starts dictating what people...
And if extreme content gets more engagement.
Then the algorithm promotes more extreme content. It creates filter bubbles, amplifies polarization. The book mentions how this dynamic apparently influenced politics in Brazil.
Even though the algorithm itself wasn't political, it was just chasing the metric.
Precisely. Optimizing for engagement, but reshaping reality as a side effect. It's a subtle form of control, dictated by the like button.
Okay, that's a lot of Harari's core argument. But what about other perspectives? The reception wasn't universally positive, was it?
No, definitely not. There's been a fair bit of criticism. For example, that Bengali review you mentioned earlier highlights Harari's point that AI doesn't need consciousness to be powerful, just intelligence, pattern recognition, like Deep Blue beating Kasparov in chess.
Right. Intelligence is the key, not feeling. That review also mentioned the idea of humanity facing a kind of alien intelligence in AI.
Yeah, that framing. But then you look at Goodreads reviews, and some people found Nexus a bit chaotic. Sebastian Gepsky felt it wasn't as focused as Harari's earlier work, maybe because AI isn't Harari's deepest expertise.
And Gepsky also argued that social media isn't doing anything fundamentally new, it's just faster and bigger.
Kind of, yeah. Amplification rather than total novelty. Other reviewers like Mary317 just found it hard to follow, lacking a clear central thread. Lotfi Haddad called it superficial, repetitive even.
Ouch. Quite a range of reaction.
Definitely. But then you have reviewers like Brandon Forsyth, also on Goodreads, saying it's absolutely essential reading for our times, precisely because algorithms are controlling so much information.
And there was criticism about potential biases in Harari's own perspective, like focusing too much on Western democracy.
Yes, Beauregard Bottomley brought that up, suggesting Harari perhaps downplays the role of corporations in shaping narratives, focusing more on state actors.
Interesting point. What about Harari's own take on these issues, say, from interviews?
Well, in that Laxada interview, he doubles down on the danger AI poses to genuine human dialogue because it can mimic communication so well.
The end of human dialogue idea. Scary.
And he reiterates that intelligence consciousness. AI doesn't need feelings to be effective, but its ability to fake emotions is getting better. There's a whole other can of...
Leading to questions about AI rights, if they ever do achieve consciousness.
Exactly. He touches on that hypothetical future. He also stresses the power of stories again, and AI's growing ability to create them. He uses money as an analogy, a powerful story humans created, and suggests AI could create entirely new, complex systems based on new stories.
But he insists he's not predicting the future.
Correct. He emphasizes in the interview that these are warnings about potential futures, dependent on choices we make now. He sees himself as a communicator, bridging academia and the public.
And that point about needing more boring stability, less constant excitement.
Yeah, quite a counterintuitive take in our hyperstimulated world. Maybe stability is underrated.
Food for thought, definitely. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground from Nexus.
We have, from the deep history of information networks built on stories,
through the rise of bureaucracy, the unique challenges of AI as a new kind of agent in these networks,
the critical alignment problem, the emergence of these intercomputer realities, the issues of surveillance, AI fallibility, and bias.
And finally, AI's power to shape our narratives, the dictatorship of the like.
And running through it all is Harari's central concern. How do we maintain that balance between truth and order, between discovery and stability, in the age of incredibly powerful AI?
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Given AI can learn, adapt, create, how will our basic understanding of things like truth, reality, even what it means to be human, change?
And what's our individual responsibility in all of this? How do we help shape how these technologies develop and get used?
Lots to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
And don't forget, if you want to dig deeper into AI concepts, check out the course at rajamanikam.com and use that code QPT for a discount.